Money doesn't just buy power, it buys the perfect mask. Mark Vance thought he was untouchable. He was the king of Wall Street, sipping vintage champagne on a yacht in Monaco with a woman half his age, laughing about how he'd finally outsmarted his boring wife, Annie. He thought she was at home, crying over their prenup. But Mark made one fatal mistake. He assumed Annie was weak because she was quiet. While he was celebrating his freedom, she was in a lawyer's office 4,000 miles away, signing a document that would turn his entire empire into dust. This isn't just a divorce, it's an execution. The champagne was a 1998 Krug Clos d'Ambonnet, a bottle that cost more than most people's cars, and it tasted like victory. Mark Vance swirled the golden liquid in his glass, leaning back against the plush leather banquette of the Siren, his 150-foot super yacht currently docked in the glittering harbour of Port Hercules, Monaco. The Mediterranean sun was beginning to set, casting a bruised purple light over the Monte Carlo casino on the hill. "You look like the cat who ate the canary," a voice purred next to him. Sasha, 23 years old and possessing the kind of beauty that made traffic stop, trailed a manicured finger down his arm. She was wearing a silk dress that looked like it would dissolve if a breeze hit it the wrong way. "Better," Mark said, his voice rough with satisfaction. "I'm the cat who ate the canary, fire-bombed the birdcage and collected the insurance money." Sasha giggled, a sound that was light and airy, devoid of any real substance. It was exactly what Mark liked about her. She didn't ask about his asset allocation or the impending SEC audit. She asked if he wanted another oyster. "Is it finally done?" she asked, leaning in close. "Did you talk to the lawyers?" "The papers are being filed in New York as we speak," Mark said, taking a sip. "By the time we wake up tomorrow, Annie will be a footnote in my biography. A very well-paid footnote, sure, but gone." He looked out at the water. It had been a long time coming. His marriage to Annie Vance had started 25 years ago in a cramped apartment in Queens, back when he was just a hungry kid with a talent for aggressive arbitrage, and she was a paralegal with a sharp mind for contracts. They had built Vance Capital together, brick by brick, deal by ruthless deal. But somewhere along the way, the partnership had soured. Annie had grown stale. She was still beautiful in that regal, terrifying way, with her sharp cheekbones and icy blue eyes, but she was serious, heavy. She worried about ethics and legacy. She refused to come to the galas. She spent her time funding obscure art restoration projects in Florence. Mark wanted life. He wanted speed. He wanted Sasha. "She's not going to fight it?" Sasha asked, picking a strawberry from the silver platter. Mark scoffed. "Fight it? With what? The prenup is ironclad. I wrote it myself before I even made my first million. She gets the townhouse in London, a generous stipend, and she keeps her dignity. If she fights, she gets nothing. Annie is pragmatic. She knows when she's beaten." He checked his Patek Philippe watch. It was 10 a.m. in New York. The courier should be arriving at the penthouse on 57th Street right about now to serve her. He imagined the scene. Annie, sitting in that austere sunroom of hers, sipping Earl Grey, opening the envelope. The shock, the quiet resignation. He pulled his phone out of his pocket. No missed calls, no frantic texts. Silence, Mark grinned. The sound of total capitulation. "To the future?" Sasha toasted, clinking her glass against his. "To freedom," Mark corrected. Just then, his phone buzzed. It wasn't Annie. It was Marcus Thorne, his CFO and oldest friend. Marcus was the only person Mark trusted completely, a man who knew where all the bodies were buried because he had helped dig the graves. Mark frowned. Marcus knew he was on vacation. He knew not to call unless the building was on fire. "Excuse me, babe," Mark muttered, sliding out of the booth. He walked to the railing of the yacht, the warm sea breeze ruffling his silver hair. "Marcus? This better be good. I'm about to order the lobster." "Mark." Marcus's voice was strange, tight, like he was being strangled. "Where are you?" "I'm on the boat, Marcus. You know where I am." "What's going on?" "You need to check your email," Marcus said. "Now." "Can't it wait? I'm celebrating." "Mark, shut up and check your email," Marcus screamed. Mark froze. In 30 years, he had never heard Marcus raise his voice. A cold prickle of unease started at the base of his neck. All right, hang on." He put the phone on speaker and tapped open his email app. There was a message at the top, flagged high priority. It wasn't from Marcus. It was from the board of directors of Vance Capital. Subject: Notice of extraordinary general meeting and change of control. Mark blinked. Change of control? That was impossible. He owned 51% of the voting shares. He was the control. He opened the email. The legal jargon was dense, but the key phrase jumped out at him like a physical blow. Pursuant to the triggering of Clause 14B of the Vance Family Trust, voting rights previously held by Mr. Mark Vance have been transferred effective immediately to the secondary trustee. "What is this?" Mark hissed into the phone. "Clause 14B, that's the competency clause. That's for if I have a stroke or go insane. I'm perfectly fine." "Keep reading," Marcus whispered. Mark scrolled down. Transfer initiated upon the certified filing of irrevocable assets to the Sovereign Charity Initiative, signed by power of attorney holder, Mrs. Annie Vance. The phone slipped from Mark's hand and clattered onto the teak deck. He didn't pick it up. He couldn't feel his fingers. Power of attorney. He flashed back to 3 years ago. He had been going in for a minor heart surgery, a valve replacement. Routine, but scary. Annie had been there, holding his hand. The lawyers had insisted on a power of attorney, just in case something went wrong during anesthesia. A standard, durable power of attorney. He remembered signing it. He remembered joking, "Don't sell the company while I'm under, okay?" Annie had looked at him with those unreadable eyes and said, "I'll only do what's best for us, Mark." He had never revoked it. He had forgotten it even existed. He scrambled for the phone. "Marcus, tell me she didn't." "She did," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "She didn't just transfer the shares, Mark. She donated them. She triggered a charitable trust clause we set up for tax evasion in 08. She moved your majority stake into a non-profit entity dedicated to environmental cleanup. She gave my company to a garbage collection charity. Effectively, yes. But here's the kicker. The trust is irrevocable. And guess who she appointed as the permanent chairwoman of the trust? Mark felt bile rise in his throat. Annie. Annie, Marcus confirmed. She controls the voting rights now. She called an emergency board meeting 20 minutes ago. You've been voted out as CIO, Mark, effective immediately. They cited misconduct and misappropriation of funds based on the receipts for the yacht you're currently standing on. Mark looked around the siren. The golden light suddenly looked harsh, fake. Sasha was still sitting there, taking a selfie with her champagne. "She can't do this," Mark whispered. "It's my money. It's my life." "It was," Marcus said. "She froze your personal accounts too, Mark. She used the POA to flag them for their suspicious activity, pending an audit. Your cards are dead." Mark stared at the phone. The line went dead. He looked up at Sasha. "Sasha," he croaked. She looked up, beaming. "Did you see? I got over 1,000 likes already." "We have to go," Mark said, stumbling toward her. We have to leave, now. But we haven't had dinner. Forget dinner. We need to get off this boat. Sir? Mark spun around. The captain of the Siren, a burly Frenchman named Luc, was standing there with 2 crew members. They weren't smiling. Mr. Vance? Luc said, crossing his arms. I just received a call from the owner's representative. I am the owner, Mark shouted. Not anymore, sir. The yacht is owned by Vance Capital Holdings. I've been instructed to inform you that the vessel has been recalled to Nice for inventory, and... Luke hesitated, looking embarrassed. I've been told to ask you to disembark. Immediately. You're kicking me off my own boat? We have strict orders, sir. Security is waiting on the dock. Mark looked at the dock. 2 large men in dark suits were standing at the gangway, arms crossed. This is insane, Sasha said, standing up, her voice shrill. Mark, tell them who you are. They know who I am, Mark said, his voice barely a whisper. I'm nobody. The flight from Nice to New York was humiliating. Mark Vance, who hadn't flown commercial in 15 years, found himself squeezed into seat 34B of a Delta flight, wedged between a crying baby and a man eating a tuna sandwich. Sasha was gone. The moment his credit card was declined at the hotel in Monaco, she had vanished. She claimed she was going to the bathroom and never came back. He later saw on Instagram that she was on a different yacht, one owned by a Russian oligarch Mark had done business with last year. He landed at JFK at 2:30 p.m., unshaven, wearing the same linen suit he'd had on the boat, now wrinkled and stained with sweat. He had $50 in cash in his pocket, emergency money he kept in his phone case. It was all he had. He hailed a cab, giving the address for the penthouse on 57th Street. He knew the locks might be changed, but he had to try. He had to see her. He had to scream at her until she fixed this. The doorman, Henry, whom Mark had tipped thousands of dollars over the years, looked at him with pity. Mr. Vance, Henry said, tipping his hat. I wasn't expecting you. Let me up, Henry, Mark growled, pushing past him. Sir, Mrs. Vance gave specific instructions. I own the damn building, Henry. Let me up. Henry sighed and swiped his keycard. Good luck, sir. The elevator ride was silent and swift. When the doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer, Mark stormed in, ready for war. Annie, he bellowed. Annie, come out here and face me. The apartment was quiet, but it wasn't empty. Sitting in the main living room, on a white velvet armchair that faced the window overlooking Central Park, sat a man. He was bald, wearing a suit that cost more than Mark's first house, and he was calmly reading the Wall Street Journal. It was Arthur Sterling, the most vicious, expensive divorce attorney in New York City, a man known as the Butcher of Park Avenue. Mark stopped dead. Where is she? Arthur folded the newspaper slowly and placed it on the coffee table. He took off his reading glasses. Hello, Mark. You look tired. Where is my wife, Arthur? Annie is currently in Tuscany, Arthur said pleasantly. She's overseeing the restoration of a 14th century chapel. She finds the work very soothing. She stole my company, Mark shouted, his veins bulging in his neck. She committed fraud. That power of attorney was for medical emergencies. Arthur tisked, shaking his head. Language, Mark. Precision is key. The power of attorney was general and durable. It granted her unlimited power to dispose of assets as she saw fit. You signed it. You notarized it. You never revoked it. I'll sue her. I'll sue you. I'll burn this whole city down. With what money? Arthur asked. The question hung in the air, heavy and cold. We've audited the accounts, Mark. It's messy. Very messy. Millions of dollars siphoned off to shell companies in the Caymans. Payments to lifestyle consultants like Miss Sasha Volkov. The board is preparing criminal charges for embezzlement." Mark felt the blood drain from his face. "That was my money. I earned it." "Technically, you misappropriated company funds to facilitate a personal affair. That's a breach of fiduciary duty. Annie, in her infinite mercy, has decided to offer you a deal." Arthur reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "A deal?" Mark laughed, a jagged, hysterical sound. "Sign this," Arthur said, sliding the paper across the polished marble table. "It's a confession. You admit to the misuse of funds. You agree to resign permanently from Vance Capital and all its subsidiaries. You agree to a complete gag order. You will never speak to the press, never write a book, never mention Annie's name in public again. And if I sign it? If you sign it, Annie drops the criminal charges. She will grant you a small allowance, $4,000 a month, enough to live a modest life. And she won't release the other file." Mark narrowed his eyes. "What other file?" Arthur smiled. It was a shark's smile. "The one containing the emails between you and Senator Corcoran regarding the insider trading on the Farmer merger last year. The one that would put you in federal prison for 20 years. Mark collapsed onto the sofa opposite Arthur. The fight left him all at once, rushing out like air from a punctured tire. He remembered those emails. He had been so arrogant, so sure he was encrypted, so sure he was safe. Annie had everything. She had been watching him, not just for weeks, but for years. She had been collecting ammunition, waiting for the moment he pulled the trigger so she could drop the bomb. "Why?" Mark whispered. "Why go this far? Why not just divorce me?" Arthur stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Annie wanted me to give you a message if you ask that." He walked to the elevator, pressing the button. She said, "I didn't mind the infidelity, Mark. I expected it. I didn't even mind the neglect. But when you missed our daughter's graduation to go to Cabo with that girl, that was when you ceased to be my husband and became a liability. And I always liquidate liabilities." The elevator doors opened. "You have 1 hour to vacate the premises, Mark. Sign the paper, leave it on the table. Security will escort you out." Arthur stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. Mark sat alone in the silent, sprawling penthouse. The view of Central Park was magnificent. The sun was shining on the billionaires and the tourists and the lovers. He looked at the paper. He looked at the pen. He picked up the pen. His hand shook. He signed his name. Mark Vance. He left the paper on the table. He didn't pack a bag. He had nothing to pack. Everything in this apartment belonged to the Vance Trust now. He walked out the front door, down the hall, and pressed the button for the service elevator. He couldn't face Henry the doorman again. He walked out the back exit into the alleyway. The smell of garbage and exhaust hit him. He checked his pockets. $50. He walked to the corner and bought a pack of cigarettes and a bottle of water. He stood on the corner of 57th and 6th, watching the limousines drive by. He was free, just like he wanted. But as he stood there, invisible in the crowd, Mark Vance realized something terrifying. The game wasn't over. Annie had won the battle, yes. She had nuked his life. But she had left him alive. And Mark Vance was a man who knew how to build from zero. He took a drag of the cigarette, his eyes hard and cold. "Tuscany," he muttered to himself. He turned and started walking toward the subway. He wasn't going to Tuscany. Not yet. He needed a stake. He needed a partner. He needed to visit an old friend in Queens, a man named Sal the Wrench Moretti, who Mark had helped avoid a RICO indictment 10 years ago. Sal owed him. and Sal didn't care about irrevocable trusts or powers of attorney. Mark descended into the subway, the darkness swallowing him whole. The billionaire was dead. The hustler was back. The rain in Queens didn't taste like the rain in Monaco. In Monaco, rain was a refreshing mist that cleaned the decks of yachts. In Astoria, standing outside a corrugated metal garage door under the flickering orange hum of a street lamp, the rain tasted like rust and old motor oil. Mark Vance shivered. He had traded his linen suit for a thrift store leather jacket and a pair of stiff jeans that didn't fit right. He looked like a ghost of his former self, gaunt, unshaven, eyes burning with a desperate, manic intensity. He banged his fist against the metal door. Thud, thud, thud. "We're closed," a muffled voice yelled from inside. "It's Mark," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Tell Sal it's Mark Vance. Tell him I'm calling in the favor from 09. Silence. Then, the grinding screech of a heavy chain being pulled. The small pedestrian door within the larger garage door creaked open. A mountain of a man, biceps tattooed with fading ink, stared down at him. "You look like hell, Mr. Vance," the man grunted. "I've had a bad week, Tony. Let me in." Mark was ushered into the warmth of the garage. It smelled of espresso and axle grease. In the back, sitting at a folding card table playing solitaire, was Salvatore the Wrench Moretti. Sal wasn't a mob boss from a movie. He was a businessman who operated in the grey areas of sanitation and construction. He was 60, bald, with eyes that missed nothing. He had made millions because Mark had tipped him off about a zoning change 10 years ago, a change that turned Sal's junkyard into prime condo real estate. Sal didn't look up from his cards. "I saw the news, Mark. Billionaire philanthropist Annie Vance pledges fortune to save the oceans." "Very touching. And you? You're nowhere. Erased." "I need a stake, Sal," Mark said, walking up to the table. He didn't beg. He demanded. "I need 100,000 in cash, unmarked. Tonight." Sal chuckled, finally looking up. "You walk in here, smelling like a wet dog with zero assets, and ask for 100 grand. Why shouldn't I just throw you out?" "Because I know where the bodies are buried," Mark said softly. "Literally." Sal stopped smiling. He motioned for Tony to leave the room. "Talk," Sal said. "Annie thinks she has everything," Mark began, pacing the concrete floor. "She has the stocks, the properties, the accounts. She audited everything, but she missed the Onyx file." "Onyx?" "In 2015, Vance Capital bought a chemical plant in New Jersey. We stripped it, sold the assets, and shut it down. But before we did, we found the 20,000 barrels of toxic sludge in the basement. Properly disposing of it would have cost $40 million and tanked the stock price." Sal raised an eyebrow. "So what did you do?" "I paid a guy. We moved the barrels. We buried them under a plot of land in upstate New York, a plot of land that was worthless scrub brush. So, you're an environmental criminal. Congratulations." "That plot of land," Mark leaned in, his eyes gleaming, "is the exact location Annie is currently trying to buy for her new, clean earth sanctuary. She wants to build a nature reserve there. She has no idea what's under the soil." Sal whistled. "If she buys it, and the EPA tests the ground—" "She goes to prison for my crime," Mark grinned. "Or the charity goes bankrupt trying to clean it up. But that's not the play, Sal. I don't want to send her to jail yet. I want money." "How does this get us paid?" "The deed to the land is currently held by a shell company I set up years ago. The company is defunct, but the ownership is still in limbo. I have the physical bearer bonds that prove ownership of the land. They are in a safety deposit box in a private vault in Chinatown. I need the cash to pay the back fees on the vault and to set up a new identity to act as the seller. Mark slammed his hand on the table. She wants that land, Sal. It's the centerpiece of her new public image. We sell it to her, but we don't sell it for market value. We squeeze her. We sell it for $20 million. Then once the check clears, I leak the location of the toxic waste to the press. She loses the money and her reputation. Sal stared at Mark for a long time. He saw the hunger in the man's eyes. It was the hunger of a wolf that had been kicked out of the pack. 50-50, Sal said. 80-20, it's my dirt. You have nothing, Mark, Sal snapped. You have no ID, no credit, no friends. You are a ghost. Without me, you starve. 60-40, and I control the money. Mark hesitated. He hated being the junior partner, but he had no choice. Deal. Sal reached into a drawer under the table and pulled out a thick envelope. He tossed it to Mark. Get a haircut. Get a suit. You look like a bum. And Mark? Yeah? If this blows back on me, if the feds come sniffing around my garage because of your toxic waste, I won't sue you. I'll put you under that land with the barrels. Mark grabbed the envelope. For the first time in a week, he felt the weight of potential in his hand. Don't worry, Sal. The only person getting buried is my wife. 3 months later, the transformation was complete. Mark Vance no longer existed. In his place stood Arthur Vane, a venture capitalist with a vague background in European markets and a very sharp haircut. He sat in the back of a blacked-out SUV, parked across the street from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was the night of the Blue Planet Gala, the crown jewel of Annie Vance's new philanthropic empire. Inside the museum, the elite of New York were toasting Annie. Mark watched the live stream on a tablet. Annie looked magnificent in a silver gown, radiating grace and humility. She was holding a microphone, standing on a podium in the Temple of Denda. We cannot change the past, Annie was saying, her voice echoing in the great hall. But we can cleanse the future. That is why the Vance Trust is proud to announce the acquisition of the Hudson Valley Sanctuary, a place where nature can heal. Mark smiled in the darkness of the car. She had bought it. The deal had closed 2 days ago. Sal's shell company had received a wire transfer for $22 million. Annie had paid 3 times the market value because Arthur Vane had driven a hard bargain, claiming other developers were interested. She had taken the bait. Now it was time to snap the trap. He picked up his burner phone. He had the number for the New York Times investigative desk queued up. He was going to send them the coordinates of the buried barrels and the original shipping manifests he had retrieved from the Chinatown vault. His thumb hovered over the send button. I would like to invite the director of this project to the stage, Annie continued on the screen. My inspiration, and the person who actually selected the site for the sanctuary, my daughter, Isabella. Mark froze. Isabella walked onto the stage. She was 22 now, fresh out of Yale with a degree in environmental science. She looked exactly like Annie, but she had Mark's chin. She looked nervous, but proud. Thank you, Mom, Isabella said, her voice trembling slightly. This land means everything to me. I spent the last 6 months surveying it. I walked every acre. It's going to be my life's work to restore it. Mark's breath hitched in his throat. Isabella was the project lead. If he leaked the toxic waste info now, he wouldn't just be destroying Annie. He would be framing his own daughter for environmental negligence. Isabella had signed off on the surveys. If the barrels were found now, it would look like she was incompetent, or worse, complicit. It would destroy her career before it even started. Damn it! Mark screamed, slamming the tablet against the seat. The screen cracked. He couldn't do it. He was a monster. He knew that. He was a cheater, a liar, a thief. But Isabella was the one pure thing he had ever created. He couldn't nuke her. Change of plans, he muttered to himself. He dialed Sal. Did you call the papers? Sal asked immediately. No, we can't leak the waste. What? We have the money, Mark. Who cares? Burn it down. Isabella is running the project. If I burn the land, I burn her. I need a new angle. I don't care about your kid, Mark. We made a deal. I said I have a new angle. Mark snapped. Listen to me. We have the 20 million. That gives us leverage. But I'm going for something bigger. I'm going for the company. I'm going to take Vance Capital back. How? You signed it away. I need to prove that Annie obtained the power of attorney under duress or false pretenses. I need to prove she planned the takeover while I was mentally incapacitated during my surgery recovery. I need a witness. Who? Marcus Thorne. Marcus, the CFO, the man who had delivered the news of Mark's demise on the yacht. Marcus was weak. Marcus followed the power. Right now, he was serving Annie because she held the keys. But Marcus had secrets too. I need you to find out where Marcus is tonight, Mark said. He won't be at the gala. Annie hates him. She only kept him on because he knows the tax codes. He's probably at that underground poker game in Tribeca he loves. And if he is, pick him up. Bring him to the warehouse. I need to have a conversation with my old friend. 2 hours later, in the back room of Sal's warehouse in Queens, Marcus Thorne sat tied to a wooden chair. He was sweating profusely, his bow tie undone. Mark stepped out of the shadows. He looked immaculate in his new suit, the very picture of the corporate shark he used to be. Hello, Marcus. Marcus's eyes bulged. Mark? My God, Mark, I thought you were in Europe. Annie said... Annie lies, Mark said smoothly, pulling up a metal stool and sitting knee to knee with Marcus. She said I was out. She said I was finished. But here I am. What do you want? I don't have access to the accounts anymore. She locked everything down. I don't want money, Marcus. I want the truth. I want you to testify. Testify to what? That Annie conspired to trigger the competency clause before I had my surgery. That she bribed the doctor to say I was mentally unfit for longer than I was. If we can prove fraud in the activation of the trust, the whole transfer is void. I get the company back. She goes to jail. Marcus laughed nervously. You're delusional. The doctor is dead, Mark. Heart attack last month. Convenient, right? Annie covers her tracks. Mark felt a cold chill. The doctor was dead? Annie was playing a game far darker than he realized. Then I need something else, Mark hissed. Give me something, Marcus, or my friend Sal here is going to demonstrate why they call him the Wrench. Sal stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. Wait, wait! Marcus screamed. There is something, but it's not about the doctor. It's about the IPO. What IPO? Vance Capital isn't just a charity, Mark. That's the front. Annie is preparing to take the green tech division public next month. She's valuing it at $4 billion. So, the tech, it doesn't exist, Marcus whispered. The carbon capture prototypes she's showing investors? They're fake. She's running a Theranos-level scam to inflate the value of the trust so she can cash out and disappear. Mark sat back, stunned. Annie, the ethical crusader, the woman who scolded him for aggressive arbitrage, was running a massive securities fraud scheme. She's not doing it for the money, Marcus continued, tears streaming down his face. She's doing it because she's being blackmailed. Mark grabbed Marcus by the collar. Who? Who is blackmailing my wife? Marcus shook his head. I don't know his name. I just know he's powerful. He has something on her. Something from way back, before she met you. That's why she stole your company, Mark. She needed the billions to pay him off." Mark released Marcus. His mind was racing. He had spent months hating Annie, plotting her destruction. But if Marcus was right, Annie wasn't the villain. She was a victim who had sacrificed him to save herself. Or was this just another lie? Mark stood up. "Keep him here, Sal. Fed and watered, but he doesn't leave." "Where are you going?" Sal asked. Mark adjusted his cuffs. "I'm going to the gala. I think it's time Mr. Arthur Vane introduced himself to the host." He walked out into the rain. The game had changed. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was a rescue mission, or an assassination. He would decide when he looked into her eyes. But as Mark stepped into the night, he didn't notice the black sedan parked down the street, lights off. A man inside snapped a photo of Mark leaving the warehouse with a telephoto lens. The man picked up his phone. "Target acquired. He's in New York, and he knows about the blackmail." A distorted voice on the other end replied, "Take him out. Make it look like a robbery." The engine of the sedan roared to life. Mark Vance was back in the game, but this time the stakes weren't just money. They were life and death. The Temple of Denda, inside the Metropolitan Museum of Art, was bathed in soft blue light, designed to mimic the Nile at twilight. Waiters in white jackets moved silently through the crowd of billionaires, politicians, and celebrities, offering champagne that cost more than a teacher's annual salary. Mark Vance, now Arthur Vane, adjusted his titanium-framed glasses. He had dyed his silver hair a severe black and grew a neatly trimmed beard. He looked like a tech mogul from Berlin. He moved through the crowd, a shark in a tank of tropical fish. He saw Senator Corcoran near the bar, laughing loudly, his face flushed with drink. The senator was a large man with a predatory smile. Seeing him there confirmed Marcus's story. Corcoran was the puppet master. But Mark's eyes were fixed on the woman in the center of the room. Annie. She was standing by the reflective pool, surrounded by admirers. She looked exhausted. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She looked like a woman walking to the gallows. Mark took a breath. He grabbed a glass of champagne and approached the circle. "Mrs. Vance," he said. His voice dropped an octave, accented with a faint German lilt. "A magnificent evening. Arthur Vane, Vane Ventures." Annie turned. She offered a polite, practiced hand. "Mr. Vane, thank you for coming. I understand you made a very generous donation to acquire the sanctuary land." "I did," Mark said, taking her hand. He didn't let go. He squeezed it 3 times. Short, short, long. It was a signal they had used 20 years ago when they were stuck at boring dinner parties and wanted to leave. It meant, "Code red. Get me out of here." Annie's eyes went wide. She stared at him, really stared at him, piercing through the dyed hair and the glasses. She saw the eyes. "Mark?" she breathed, the name barely a ghost on her lips. "Smile," he whispered through his teeth. "We're being watched." Annie, to her credit, didn't flinch. She turned to the group. "If you'll excuse me, Mr. Vane has some questions about the carbon credits. I'll just be a moment." She took his arm, her grip like iron, and led him away from the main crowd, toward the shadows of the ancient sandstone temple. "Are you insane?" she hissed, once they were out of earshot. "If they see you, you're dead. You were supposed to be in Europe." "I was supposed to be destroyed," Mark countered, his voice low and hard. "You took my company, Annie. You took my life." "I saved your life, you idiot." Tears welled in her eyes. "Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I wanted to turn into a fraud?" "Marcus told me," Mark said. "He told me about the blackmail. Who is it, Annie? Is it Corcoran?" Annie stiffened. She looked toward the bar where the senator was holding court. "He has the manifests, Mark. The toxic waste manifests from the Jersey plant. I know. I have the copies. No, you don't understand, Annie said, her voice trembling. The manifests don't have your signature on them. They have Isabella's. Mark felt the world tilt on its axis. What? That summer she interned for us, the summer she was 18. You made her sign for deliveries to build confidence. You didn't tell her what she was signing. Corcoran has the papers. He told me if I didn't liquidate the company and funnel the money into his offshore accounts through this fake IPO, he would leak the documents. He would send our daughter to federal prison for environmental terrorism. Mark leaned back against the stone wall, nausea rolling over him. He remembered that summer. He remembered handing Isabella the clipboard. Just sign here, sweetie. It's just logistics. He had framed his own daughter, and for the last 3 months he had been blaming Annie for cleaning up his mess. My God, Mark whispered. Annie, I don't want your apologies, she snapped. I want you to leave. The IPO launches in 48 hours. Once the money hits Corcoran's account, he gives me the originals. Then I go to jail for fraud, and Isabella is safe. That's the deal. It's a bad deal, Mark said. Corcoran won't give you the papers. He'll keep bleeding you until there's nothing left. He's a parasite. I have no choice. You do now. We stop the IPO. We take Corcoran down. How? He's a US senator. Mark stopped. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement on the upper balcony overlooking the temple. A flash of light. A reflection on a lens. It wasn't a camera. Get down! Mark screamed. He tackled Annie, driving her to the marble floor, just as the air split with the crack of a high-velocity round. The bullet shattered the champagne flute in the hand of a waiter, standing exactly where Annie's head had been a second ago. Chaos erupted. Screams. Glass breaking. The wealthy elite of New York scrambled like rats in a flood. He missed, Mark yelled, scrambling to his feet and hauling Annie up. Run! Another shot rang out, chipping the stone of the temple inches from Mark's ear. Security! Someone screamed. They're not security, Mark shouted, grabbing Annie's hand. He saw 2 men in suits pushing through the panic, guns drawn. They weren't police. They were the cleanup crew, the black sedan guys. The service exit, Annie gasped, kicking off her high heels. Through the Egyptian wing. They sprinted through the darkened halls of the museum, past sarcophagi and statues of forgotten gods. Mark could hear heavy footsteps behind them. They're trying to kill us both, Mark panted. The deal is off, Annie. Corcoran is tying up loose ends. They burst through a fire door into the cool night air of Central Park. A black van screeched around the corner, tires smoking. That's them, Annie cried. No, Mark said, spotting a yellow taxi idling at a red light. That's us. He ran to the taxi, ripped the back door open, and shoved Annie inside. He dove in after her. Drive! Mark roared at the driver. Drive or I'll kill you! The driver, a terrified man named Raj, slammed on the gas. The taxi lurched forward, just as the black van rammed the bumper. Go! 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 Mark yelled. Bullets pinged against the trunk of the taxi. Raj screamed and swerved through traffic, running a red light on 5th Avenue. Mark looked back. The van was stuck behind a bus. They had seconds. Where are we going? Annie cried, clutching her torn silver dress. Mark looked at her. His glasses were gone. His lip was bleeding. But the fire was back in his eyes. We need a fortress, Mark said. We're going to the one place in this city where nobody looks for a billionaire. The yellow taxi hydroplaned across the slick asphalt of the Willis Avenue Bridge, tires screaming as they crossed into the South Bronx. Inside, the air smelled of wet wool and copper, the distinct metallic scent of blood. Mark Vance clutched his side. The bullet that had chipped the stone pillar at the museum had sent jagged shrapnel into his ribs. Beside him, Annie sat shivering, her ruined silver gown plastered to her skin, her diamond earrings long gone, lost in the sprint through Central Park. "Stop here," Mark barked. The taxi screeched to a halt beneath the deafening rumble of the 6 train. Mark tore his Breguet watch off his wrist and tossed it into the front seat. "Get lost. You never saw us." The driver sped off, leaving them in the pouring rain in front of a boarded-up textile factory. "This is it?" Annie shouted over the noise of the train. "This is where we die?" "This is where we fight," Mark growled. He led her down a trash-strewn alley to a rusted steel door. He didn't use a key. He slid a loose brick aside to reveal a biometric scanner and pressed his bloody thumb against the glass. Access granted. The heavy door groaned open. Inside, the squalor of the Bronx vanished. The interior was a fortress of humming technology, kept at a frigid 60 degrees. Rows of black server towers lined the walls, blinking with rhythmic blue lights. "The black box," Mark said, locking the door behind them. "My doomsday vault. It runs on solar and satellite, completely off the grid." He collapsed into a chair at a cramped workstation, fingers flying across a keyboard. "Corcoran's IPO goes live in 40 minutes. If that bell rings, he gets $4 billion of clean money and vanishes." "We can't stop an IPO, Mark," Annie argued, pacing the small room. "The institutional money is locked. It's a machine." "We don't need to break the machine," Mark said, his eyes reflecting the scrolling blue code. "We need to poison the well." He pointed to a webcam. "We record a video. You and me. We claim that Vance Green Tech isn't an environmental company. We claim it's a front for laundering money for sanctioned terrorist entities." Annie stared at him, horrified. "That's a lie. We'll go to prison for market manipulation." "We're already dead if we don't," Mark snapped. "The SEC runs on fear. If we drop a terrorism allegation 5 minutes before the bell, the circuit breakers trip. They halt trading. It freezes Corcoran's money while I hack his private cloud." Annie looked at the progress bar on the screen. Decryption, 18%. It was moving agonizingly slow. She wiped the grime from her face. "Okay, let's do it." 8:55 a.m. The video file finished uploading. Mark had routed it through servers in Singapore to make it untraceable. On the monitors, they watched CNBC. The anchors were discussing the historic launch. Suddenly, the feed glitched. The breaking news banner flashed red. "Urgent. Trading halt requested for Vance Green Tech." The anchor pressed a hand to her earpiece. "We are getting reports. A video statement from the fugitive Mark Vance. Allegations of terrorism financing." In the server room, Mark exhaled. "It worked. The stock is dead. Now what?" "Now." Mark turned back to the hacking software. "We wait for the lock to pick." 9:45 a.m. The silence in the room was heavy. Suddenly the computer chirped. "Access granted." "Gotcha," Mark hissed. He was into Corcoran's private cloud. He ignored the emails and went straight to a folder labeled collateral. He opened a file, the scanned PDF of the toxic waste manifest, the document that had held Annie hostage for months. Mark zoomed in on the signature line. Isabella Vance. "It's real," Annie sobbed. "She signed it. She was just a kid." "Wait," Mark said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Look closer. I don't want to see it. Annie, look at the I in her name." Annie squinted at the screen. "Isabella has dotted her I with a small open circle since she was 12, Mark said, pointing. "She says it's artistic, but look at this signature. It's a solid dot, a standard ink blot." Annie stared. "And the V," Mark continued. "Isabella curves the bottom. This V is sharp, jagged." "It's a forgery," Annie whispered, the realization crashing over her. He traced her signature but got the details wrong. "She never signed it," Mark said, a terrifying grin spreading across his face. "She's innocent. He's been blackmailing you with a ghost." The relief was explosive. They weren't protecting a criminal. They were victims. "I'm downloading everything," Mark said, jamming a flash drive into the port. "The forgery, his emails, the bribes. We upload it to the blockchain. He can't kill us if the truth is everywhere." Boom. The heavy steel door of the warehouse shuddered violently. Dust rained down. Annie spun around. "They found us!" Boom. "Corcoran's cleanup crew," Mark said. He grabbed a heavy red fire extinguisher from the wall and tossed a rusted iron wrench to Annie. "Upload is at 10%. The door hinges screamed as a battering ram hit again. A sliver of daylight pierced the gloom. "I thought you said this place was a fortress," Annie cried, gripping the wrench until her knuckles turned white. "It is," Mark said, standing between her and the buckling door. "But today it's the Alamo." The steel door screamed as the battering ram hit it again. Crack! The frame buckled. Daylight from the alleyway bled through the gap. 30%! Mark shouted, staring at the upload bar. "We need more time!" Annie gripped the heavy iron wrench with both hands. Her knuckles were white. She stood by the side of the door, her breathing ragged. "There's no way out, Mark. If they come in, you drop to the floor," Mark commanded, grabbing a bundle of loose cables. "I'll draw their fire." Bam! The door flew open, hanging off one hinge. Two men in tactical gear surged into the room. They weren't moving like police. They were moving like executioners. Mark didn't hesitate. He yanked the power cable he had severed from the main server rack, a live 220-volt line sparking with blue electricity, and whipped it toward the puddle of water near the entrance. The lead mercenary stepped into the water just as the cable hit. Zit! The man convulsed, his muscles seizing, and he collapsed backward, knocking over the man behind him. "Now, Annie!" Mark screamed. Annie swung the wrench with a primal yell, bringing it down on the arm of the second man as he tried to raise his weapon. There was a sickening crunch of bone. The gun skittered across the floor. Mark dove for the weapon, scrambling on the concrete. The second mercenary, despite his broken arm, kicked Mark in the ribs. The air left Mark's lungs in a wheeze. The mercenary drew a knife with his good hand. "Upload complete," the computer voice announced in a calm, synthetic monotone. The room went silent for a split second. Then every phone in the room started buzzing. The mercenary froze, the knife inches from Mark's throat. His earpiece crackled loudly. "Abort! Abort! It's everywhere!" A voice screamed in the mercenary's ear, loud enough for Mark to hear. "CNN, BBC, Fox, the files are live. Corcoran is being arrested on the Senate floor right now. The contract is void. Get out!" The mercenary looked at Mark. He looked at the computer screen, where thousands of files were now seeding across the global blockchain. He looked at his partner, who was groaning on the floor. "You crazy son of a bitch," the mercenary muttered. He sheathed his knife. "You actually did it." He grabbed his fallen comrade by the vest and dragged him out the door. "We're leaving. Don't follow us." They vanished into the rain-slicked alley. Mark lay on the floor, clutching his ribs, laughing. It was a painful, wheezing laugh. Annie dropped the wrench. She slid down the wall, burying her face in her hands. "Is it over?" she sobbed. Mark crawled over to her. He put his arm around her shoulders. "The upload is done. The forgery is public record. Isabella is safe. And us." Annie looked at him. Her face was smeared with grime, her silver dress ruined. "We just admitted to federal crimes, Mark. We admitted to the toxic waste cover-up to prove the forgery." Sirens began to wail in the distance. Not one or two. Dozens. The NYPD, the FBI, Homeland Security. The terrorism lie had brought the cavalry. Mark stood up and offered Annie a hand. "We go face the music," Mark said, "but we face it on our terms. We aren't the villains anymore, Annie. We're the witnesses." 6 months later. The federal prison in Otisville was minimum security, but it was still a prison. The fences were high, and the razor wire was real. Annie Vance sat at a metal table in the visitation room. She looked healthy, rested. She wore simple clothes, not the couture gowns of her past life. The door opened. Mark walked in. He was wearing a jumpsuit. He looked older, the grey hair growing back in, but his eyes were clear. He sat down opposite her. "You look good," Mark said. "Probation suits me." Annie smiled. The judge was lenient. Cooperation with the Corcoran investigation went a long way. Plus, donating the remaining assets of the trust to the EPA helped. "And Izzy?" "She's in Costa Rica," Annie said, her eyes lighting up. "She's running a legitimate research station. She writes to me every week. She asks about you." Mark looked down at his hands. "I don't deserve her forgiveness. I almost ruined her life." "You saved her life, Mark. In the end, you chose her over the money. She knows that." Annie reached across the table and placed her hand on his. "Arthur Sterling came by yesterday." "The butcher?" Mark smirked. "What did he want? I have nothing left to sue for." "He brought the final divorce decree," Annie said softly. "It's ready to sign." Mark nodded slowly. "It's for the best. We were a disaster, Annie." "We were," she agreed. "But we were a hell of a team for one night in the Bronx." She slid a paper across the table. It wasn't the divorce papers. Mark squinted at it. It was a business plan, a small one, for a consulting firm specializing in corporate ethics and cleanup. "What is this?" "I have some money left," Annie said, "from the London townhouse sale. I'm starting a new firm. I need a partner, someone who knows how to spot a lie, someone who knows where the bodies are buried so we can dig them up." "You want to hire me?" Mark laughed. "I'm a convict, Annie. I have 2 years left on my sentence." "I'll wait," Annie said simply. "I need a shark, Mark, but a shark on a leash, my leash." Mark looked at the woman he had tried to destroy, the woman who had signed his fortune away to save him from himself. He picked up the pen. 60-40? He asked, a twinkle in his eye. 55-45, Annie countered. "And I get the corner office." Mark smiled. It was the first real smile he'd had in 20 years. "Deal." He signed the paper. Not as a billionaire, not as a husband, but as a partner. The guard tapped on the glass. "Time's up, Vance." Mark stood up. "I'll see you in 2 years, Annie." "I'll be waiting," she said. Mark walked back toward the cell block. He didn't have a yacht. He didn't have a mistress. He didn't have $1 billion. But as the heavy steel door clanged shut behind him, Mark Vance felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He was rich. And that is the story of Mark and Annie Vance. A tale that proves when you build a life on secrets, the foundation will always crumble. Mark thought freedom was a yacht and a young mistress, only to realize that true freedom was the truth, no matter how much it cost him. In the end, they lost the fortune, but they regained their humanity and their daughter. What would you have done in Mark's shoes? Would you have leaked the toxic waste info to save your money, or would you sacrifice it all for your family? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this twisty saga of betrayal and redemption, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss our next story. Thanks for watching.